Ethan Miller had been on countless work trips before, but this one felt different from the start. Maybe it was because his husband, Daniel, barely looked up from his phone when Ethan said goodbye that morning. Maybe it was because the silence in their house had become too normal. The kind of silence that doesn't mean peace, just distance. Ethan told himself it was just another business trip, 3 days on the road, and he'd be back before either of them noticed he was gone. He met his new colleague Liam Carter at the airport gate. Liam was younger, all confidence and charm, with a smile that seemed to light up the gray morning. They exchanged polite small talk at first, flight schedules, client expectations, the usual, but Ethan couldn't help noticing how easily Liam laughed. It wasn't forced or polite, it was real, and Ethan hadn't heard that kind of laughter in his life for a long time. During the flight, they sat side by side, sharing small jokes about airplane food and delayed takeoffs. Ethan felt comfortable in a way that caught him off guard. Liam asked about his life back home, and Ethan mentioned his husband, keeping it brief. Liam nodded, respectful, never prying, but something in his eyes, curiosity, maybe empathy, lingered. It was nothing inappropriate, just a sense that Liam saw through the polite answers and recognized the loneliness hidden behind them. When they landed, a storm rolled in. Their rental car crept along slick highways, while rain beat against the windshield. The GPS led them to a small roadside motel with flickering neon lights that read, "Vacancy." Inside, the receptionist looked apologetic as she flipped through her register. "Sorry, gentlemen," she said. "Only one room left." Ethan hesitated, ready to suggest they find another place, but the rain outside was relentless. Liam shrugged, smiling softly. "We can share. It's just one night." The room was simple. One bed, a small table, a single lamp that gave off a golden glow. The air smelled faintly of rain and coffee. Ethan offered to sleep on the floor, but Liam refused. "Don't be ridiculous," he said lightly. "We'll just stay on our own sides." It was an easy compromise, but the closeness of the space felt strangely intimate. Later, as they unpacked their laptops and notes for the next day's meeting, conversation flowed effortlessly. They talked about childhood dreams, about how Liam once wanted to be a painter, and how Ethan used to think marriage would solve everything. They laughed at the idea of perfect lives, realizing neither of them had one. At some point, the laughter faded into quiet. The rain outside turned steady, hypnotic. Liam sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through his phone, while Ethan stared at the soft light pooling across the carpet. He couldn't remember the last time he had shared a moment this still with anyone. Liam looked up. "You okay?" he asked, voice gentle. "Yeah," Ethan said after a pause. "Just tired." But that wasn't the truth. He was thinking about Daniel, wondering when their marriage had turned from love into routine. He was thinking about how easily Liam listened, how natural it felt to just be there with him. There was no pressure, no expectations, just a quiet understanding neither of them named. Later that night, they lay on opposite sides of the bed. The space between them felt both vast and too small. The lamp flickered once, then steadied, painting the walls in soft amber light. Ethan could hear Liam breathing, slow and even. He tried to focus on the sound of rain, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the warmth on the other side of the bed. He remembered the way Liam had looked at him earlier, kind, patient, and just a little curious. Not in a way that crossed lines, but in a way that reminded Ethan what it felt like to be noticed, to be seen. Ethan turned slightly, careful not to disturb him. Liam's face was half-shadowed, peaceful in sleep. For a moment, Ethan let himself feel it. The ache, the guilt, the longing to be close to someone who didn't expect anything from him. Then he closed his eyes, forcing his breath to slow, reminding himself this wasn't real, that in the morning it would all go back to normal. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't. Something had shifted, something quiet, but irreversible. As the rain kept falling outside, Ethan realized that the emptiness he'd been carrying for so long had finally met something that made him feel alive again. He didn't touch him. He didn't have to. The feeling itself was enough to keep him awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, wondering what line he was already crossing just by wanting more. And in that small motel room, under the sound of endless rain, Ethan felt both the safety and danger of being human again. The morning light crept through the thin motel curtains, painting the room in pale gold. Ethan stirred first, blinking at the quiet hum of the air conditioner and the soft rhythm of Liam's breathing beside him. For a moment, he forgot where he was, until he saw the suitcase by the door and remembered the storm, the laughter, the shared silence. A familiar guilt fluttered in his chest, sharp and immediate. Nothing had happened, yet it felt like something had. He slipped out of bed and got ready for the day, careful not to wake Liam. When he finally did, Liam's voice was calm and warm. "You're up early. Couldn't sleep?" Ethan smiled faintly, pretending it was the travel, pretending he wasn't thinking about the space between them that had felt both too close and too far. They headed to breakfast in the motel cafe, both dressed in crisp shirts, their laptops waiting on the table. The talk was light: coffee, clients, presentation details. But between the small talk, their eyes met more than once, as if there was something left unspoken from the night before. When Ethan laughed, he caught himself enjoying it too much. Liam noticed, and that easy grin of his came back, soft but knowing. After breakfast, they drove to the meeting venue, a small company office outside town. Work took over, and for hours they were both professionals again. Ethan admired how confidently Liam handled clients, how natural he was at keeping people comfortable. When their project presentation ended, the clients applauded. It was a success. Ethan felt proud, but also strangely happy. Not because of the work, but because of the person beside him. By evening, the sky darkened again. The same storm from yesterday had circled back, turning the roads slick and reflective. When they returned to the motel, the power flickered twice before cutting out completely. The room was plunged into darkness. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Liam laughed softly. "Looks like we're back to candles and stories." Ethan found a small candle on the nightstand, lit it, and set it on the table. The tiny flame danced between them, its light flickering across Liam's face. They sat together on the floor, leaning against the bed, their knees almost touching. The sound of rain was everywhere, on the windows, the roof, the pavement outside. Liam leaned his head back, sighing. "You ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" Ethan hesitated. "All the time." Liam turned to look at him. "Then why keep pretending?" Ethan stared at the candle, the way its wax ran down the glass. "Because pretending feels safer," he said. "Safer than ruining something that's supposed to matter." Liam nodded slowly. "But if it's supposed to matter, shouldn't it make you feel alive?" The words landed heavier than Ethan expected. He didn't answer right away. He didn't know how. In that dim light, with thunder rumbling in the distance, it felt like the walls around his heart were beginning to crack. He wanted to speak, to say everything he'd been holding in for years, but the words tangled in his throat. Instead, he looked at Liam, really looked at him. His soft eyes, the faint smile that seemed to understand without needing explanation. Ethan reached for his coffee mug, their hands brushed, and for a split second, neither moved. The touch was accidental, harmless. But it wasn't. It lingered. Ethan pulled his hand back quickly, the silence between them thickening. "I can't," he whispered. Liam nodded, gaze steady, voice low. "I know. You don't have to." They both sat in silence again, the rain outside masking the sound of their breathing. Ethan's heart pounded, not from fear, but from how real everything suddenly felt. Later, when Liam went to bed, Ethan stayed by the window, watching the lightning dance across the horizon. He thought about Daniel back home, how their conversations had become polite exchanges, how their bed felt colder each night. He thought about loyalty, about what it meant to love someone and still feel completely alone. When he finally turned off the candle and lay down, Liam was already asleep. The room was dark, except for the faint flashes of lightning outside. Their shoulders were inches apart. Ethan could feel the warmth radiating from the other side of the bed, the kind of warmth that didn't belong to him, but still felt right. He closed his eyes, reminding himself he hadn't done anything wrong. Yet. But as the storm raged outside, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the edge of something dangerous, and that part of him wanted to fall. He turned slightly, facing the ceiling, and whispered to himself, "Just one more night." He wasn't sure if he meant the trip, the room, or the fragile boundary between what's right and what feels real. But as the rain softened into a whisper, Ethan knew the truth. That sometimes betrayal begins long before a touch. It starts in the quiet moments when your heart chooses someone it shouldn't. The next morning was calm, the storm finally gone. The light through the curtains was soft, but it didn't bring peace. Ethan woke to the quiet sound of Liam packing his bag. No words were needed. Both knew this was their last day. There was something heavy between them now. Not regret exactly, but the awareness of a line that had been walked too closely. They drove to the airport mostly in silence. The rain had left the world washed clean, yet inside Ethan felt cluttered with thoughts. He kept his eyes on the road while Liam scrolled through his phone. Every so often, their eyes met in the reflection of the window. It wasn't awkward, it was understanding. Two people who'd shared something that could never be defined, but would never be forgotten. At the gate, they finally stopped. The airport buzzed around them. Announcements, footsteps, laughter. But for them, time seemed to slow. Liam held out a folded piece of paper. "Here," he said quietly. "Just something I wanted to say, but couldn't last night." Ethan hesitated before taking it, feeling the weight of words he hadn't read yet. "You don't have to read it now," Liam added. "Just take care of yourself." Ethan nodded, his voice catching. "You too, Liam." There was a pause, the kind that feels like an ending. Then Liam smiled, small but genuine, turned, and disappeared into the crowd. Ethan stood there for a long time, clutching the note, trying to breathe through the ache in his chest. On the plane home, he finally unfolded the paper. Liam's handwriting was neat, careful. The message was short. "You don't owe anyone your loneliness." Ethan read it twice, then again, until the words blurred with the hum of the engines. When he arrived home that evening, Daniel was there, polite, distant, asking about the trip out of habit more than care. Ethan smiled, said it went fine, and went to unpack. The house felt colder than he remembered. He placed his suitcase by the bed and looked around. Everything was the same, but he wasn't. Over dinner, Daniel scrolled through his phone, nodding at Ethan's small talk. It wasn't anger Ethan felt, but sadness, for both of them. They'd built a life full of shared routines but empty spaces. He realized he'd been faithful in action but unfaithful in heart, carrying thoughts of someone who made him feel alive in ways he'd forgotten were possible. Later that night, Ethan went for a walk through the quiet neighborhood. The air smelled like rain and wet pavement. Each step echoed with memory. Liam's laughter, the storm, the soft flicker of candlelight. He replayed the trip in his mind, not with shame, but with gratitude. That brief connection had reminded him that he was still capable of feeling deeply, that his heart wasn't broken, only buried. When he returned home, Daniel was asleep. Ethan stood by the window, watching the streetlights blur through the mist. He thought about being honest, about telling Daniel the truth, not about Liam, but about himself. About how far apart they'd drifted and how much he wanted to feel close again, even if it meant tearing down everything safe and starting over. In the following weeks, Ethan tried. He began talking to Daniel again, really talking. The first few conversations were awkward, full of hesitation, but slowly, something started to shift. Maybe it wasn't love the way it once was, but it was honest. And honesty, he realized, was its own kind of redemption. Months later, Ethan found himself driving for another meeting, taking a route that cut through the same small town. As dusk fell, he passed the same old motel, the flickering neon sign still glowing faintly against the sky. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. For a moment he thought about stopping, about walking inside just to see if anything had changed. But he didn't. He simply smiled, soft and bittersweet, and kept driving. The road stretched out ahead, endless and quiet. The memory of Liam wasn't painful anymore. It was a reminder of how fragile connection could be, and how even a brief spark could change everything. Ethan understood now that love wasn't always about staying. Sometimes it was about the moment someone made you feel seen, even if only for a few nights. As the motel lights faded in the rearview mirror, Ethan whispered into the empty car, "Thank you." He didn't mean it as goodbye, more like acceptance. What happened on that work trip would always be a small, secret chapter of his story. Not scandal, not betrayal, but awakening. The kind that leaves you different, softer, and a little more aware of the quiet places inside you that still want to be touched. Not by hands, but by understanding. The rain began again, light and steady. Ethan rolled down the window just enough to feel the cool air against his face. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel trapped between guilt and longing. He just felt human, flawed, forgiven, and finally awake.